minus 1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the 28th edition of the Time of the Writer Festival. I'm excited to be kicking off with our first panel discussion, which is titled The Evolution of Publishing in South Africa and Prospects for the Future. Joining me this afternoon, I have an esteemed panel of prominent, people and prominent publishers in the publishing industry. Andrea Nattrass from Pan Macmillan, Stevlin Vermeulen from NB Publishers, and Zukiswa Vana from Baivepo Publishing. Without taking up too much time, I'm going to hand over to each publisher to begin by introducing themselves. Before I forget my manners, I'm Sunyati and I will be steering the conversation this afternoon. Thank you. Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Sue, and thanks to Time of the Writer for having a panel like this. My name is Andrea Nattrass. I am the publisher at Pan Macmillan. I have been in that position since 2010, so it's 15 years. And prior to that, I have been involved in publishing for a further 15 years, most of those in a freelance capacity.
Over to you, Stevlin.
Thanks, Sue. Hi, everyone. I am Stevlin Vermeulen, and I'm currently the publisher at Kwela Books in the fiction division. I actually started at Kwela in 2016 as an intern and then just never left. They couldn't get rid of me, so I'm still here. This is only my 10th year in the publishing industry, so I think I feel a bit like a novice, and I definitely be learning a lot from Andrea and Sue and Zukiswa.
Thank you. And finally, Zukiswa Vana. I'm doing this in alphabetical order in case anyone's wondering. It's just easier to navigate. So just remember the order. Zukiswa, over to you.
Well, you actually cannot meet that you're saving the best for last, but okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zukiswa Vana. I am with Baivepo Publishers. To be honest, I am nowhere near what Andreas and Stevlin are in publishing. I consider myself primarily a writer, but as a publisher, I'm a hobbyist. And I started Baivepo Publishing published the first book in 2018. And it was merely to try and see what I can plug that I wasn't seeing in South African publishing industry.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. I mean, just to give the audience an overview, I mean, the publishing industry in South Africa is basically made up of the Big Five and soon to be Big Four, because NB Publishers and Jonathan Ball are merging, or I think past tense have merged. So it'll be Big Four. And then we have a lot of independent publishers, smaller presses, like represented by Zukiswa Vana, for instance. And so that's typically what the landscape looks like. And I mean, I don't know, there might be people in the audience who are considering a career in publishing. So just to kick off, the first question was, I'd like to know, what is a typical day in the life of a publisher? Andrea, what does your day look like?
My day, no 2 days are ever the same, which is one of the things that I really like about my job. Obviously, a lot of what I'm doing is around manuscripts, evaluation, and working with authors in terms of developing manuscripts. But also, at Pan Macmillan, I've got the most amazing team. There are just 4 of us working in-house, and then we freelance out a lot of our editorial layouts, proofreading, and so on work. But the 4 of us kind of cover, I've got Zodwa Kamalu Valentine on the commissioning editor side as well. We've got Sandile Nkosi on the digital side of things in particular. And then Pauline Ngabis, who is an assistant to all of us. And we're involved and working on that adult local side of things. So, you know, some of my job also involves HR and budgets and performance appraisals and so on. But I'm happiest when I'm not working with numbers and I'm working with words. So I've got meetings with authors. I've got internal meetings as well, meetings around publishing schedules. And no 2 days look the same, which is how I like it.
So I've been published by Pan Macmillan, for those of you who don't know. They did 3 of my fiction novels, and waiting on the 4th, I'm sure. I'm still to write it. No, thank you, Andrea, for that overview. Over to you, Stephen. What does your day look like?
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Andrea says, I don't know what it means to have a typical kind of day in publishing. No 2 days are the same, and that is exciting, sometimes stressful. I mean, I think the biggest misconception is that people think that we read all day. I was once introduced at an event as, oh, but she reads professionally. She's a professional reader. I wish it was like that. It's not like that at all. I mean, we are working on multiple projects at the same time. It depends on where specific title is in the production schedule. So am I proofreading or am I doing manuscript development? A large part of our job is also project management, because we do commission and outsource a lot of the editorial work to do with the production process. And one of I did a talk at UCT with the creative writing students, and in preparation, I asked some of my colleagues, what was the thing they were most shocked by when they started working in publishing? And they said the fact that we have to work in Excel. So we do work with numbers a lot. I mean, it's investment forms, it's, budgets per project, all of that. So no 2 days are the same, and it's great. It's great.
It's actually quite interesting, the budgets that you mentioned, budgets. I actually never thought of that as well as a publisher, but you guys have to look at projects and think, is it profitable, bottom line? So it's actually quite interesting because my background is also in numbers. So, I never thought publishing would actually be number driven, but once you understand the business side of it, it does make sense. Over to you, Zukiswa. Zuki, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Weirdly enough, that's also the same. No, I don't have any 2 days that are similar, but being an indie, for instance, today I started by, I am my boss and I'm my PA and I'm my book deliverer person. So I started today, for instance, with delivering books to a bookseller who wanted them. And, there's also quite a lot of, if I knew what I knew now, and I'm glad I know what I know now, because I come obviously from being a writer, and I'm still a writer primarily. And there's just a lot of work that a lot of people don't understand that goes on in publishing. You have to look at the budget and figure out how many are you going to print, what is the selling price, what is the royalty fee that's acceptable, all that a lot of people don't normally think about. Obviously, things like cover designs, proofreading, editing, And yeah, it's just it's labor. There's a lot of labor input, and I think when you've actually been right through the process of publishing a book, obviously I know the prior, I knew the writing and the many editing, but now I also know, what goes on in the back office, if you will, and if once you know that particular back office stuff, you will never, ever, ever, ever ask anybody to give you a free book. Although I do ask Stevlin.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of intense work that we don't, as readers, and we don't see, and there's behind the scenes. I mean, I got a sense from all of you that there are a lot of roles, like the editing, proofreading, layout, typesetting, and you seem to outsource a lot of these roles. Is this because it's more cost effective? Can we just chat more about that? I mean, those other roles.
So from Pan Macmillan's point of view, I guess it is more cost effective to be able to freelance out various aspects of the process. We do cover design, we would manage the process internally. And on any of these projects, someone from the team is always involved in kind of overseeing and checking in and seeing how things are going. But the fact of the matter is that when you're running a business, Pan Macmillan is one of the, I mean, it is one of the smaller groups or publishers. We've got a total of 23 full-time employees, and that goes all the way across, because we've talked about our publishing roles. And I mean, Zuki would know, she's a one-woman show in terms of you've got sales, marketing, publicity, distribution, the editorial side of things. So it really works for us to keep the kind of control over what are we publishing, when are we publishing it, and how are we publishing it internally, and then to work with various freelancers across the industry from there.
Stevlin, you've got something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'm, like the common thread that I'm kind of picking up here, and yes, in different capacities, I think it's that our teams are very small within the publishing industry. I mean, yes, Kwela Books is one of the imprints to a larger company, but essentially in terms of what I do on the fiction side, it's just me. So, I mean, I'm the one managing all of those things, setting deadlines, coming up with tentative production schedules, managing all of that. I mean, I at least, I guess, have the advantage of having, access to, the publicity and marketing team, the rights team, which we all share. But I mean, our teams across the board, they're really small. And that is, I guess, one of the factors as to why we do outsource a lot of the things, but also because it is cost effective. But I think that as a publisher, you're still very much involved at every step of the production process. Even if there's an external editor, after the author and I have done work on the manuscript, but when I receive those edits back, it's me kind of working through that with the author. At proofreading stage, it's exactly the same thing. We're proofreading, there's an external proofreader, the author's proofreading, you're the one collating all of it into one master document. We are involved in every step of the process, even if we are outsourcing some of the work. But yeah, it's crazy times. It's crazy.
I can definitely see that. Zuki, are you also, I mean, you're a one-woman show, right? I mean, I can imagine you would do all the work yourself because it's a cost-benefit kind of thing for you. Let's just hear from you, from your side.
Well, I do care about what comes out of Paivapo, as I care about a lot of stuff that I put my mind to. So I get somebody to do my cover design, and she's been absolutely amazing. Megan, between Megan and Shabnam Khan, they have been fantastic for my covers, and I've used them continuously because it's also very important for me to use women and pay women. And I have I also, get somebody from the outside for doing my proofreading. I am lucky enough that I am able to edit. So I do the editing, but I generally get somebody else to do the proofreading, and so that I don't miss any little things.
No, definitely. It's always nice to have a fresh set of eyes. I mean, as a writer, I can attest to that as well, so I could understand why you'd want to outsource those kind of functions. I mean, so as a publisher, maybe let's explain this to, people in the audience who might want to get published. I mean, what's the typical publishing timeline from the time you get, the submission, commission the work, and it gets, to the bookstore? What kind of timelines are we looking at? And how many books are you doing on average per year?
So PAN is doing on average, I'd say around 25 books a year, but that is split between probably 2/3 nonfiction, 1/3 fiction. And then on the fiction side, we always try and do a literary fiction title or two, with the balance being more commercially orientated. And even on the nonfiction side, PAN has got the Picador Africa imprint, and that's for, I guess, some of the more literary kind of work. So you're also doing some evaluation as to what kind of fits where, and best. And in terms of time frame, that is a how long is a piece of string kind of question in a way, because we, aim to have at least 6 months between when we have a finished manuscript and when we are putting a book into stores. What is interesting for me always is how short a lead time that is when you compare it to our international colleagues. So PanMac UK, if they sign up something today, they would only be publishing it in the second half of 2026 in general. And yet for us, some of the work that we do, particularly if it's kind of current affairs related, then it's very deadline driven, and you can do it in a very short amount of time if you have to, but it's not ideal because you don't want to rush any of the steps in the process. And you don't want to cut any corners. So 3 months, the shortest, 6 months, great. And then in terms of from when you see a project or you commission a project, it all depends. How much development work are you doing with an author? Again, in South Africa, we have very few literary agents that we work with. So the publisher is often put into that role of doing manuscript development with an author. And so, that process can take 6-8 months, a year sometimes. And then obviously a lot of our authors, the reality is that they can't quit their day jobs. You know about that, Sue. And so they're fitting in what's required along with their other commitments. And, so it really is when you draw up that draft schedule, I was laughing to myself because you will often start with this immaculate looking schedule, and usually within the first month it's changed, and so you need to keep updating things all the time. It's very fluid.
Stevlin, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a good laugh at what Andrea's saying because it's very relatable. But I also think it's very rare that you receive a manuscript and it's ready to go. So there is always that, back and forth, readers' reports kind of working on refining the text. I usually tell writers it's 9 months. And I don't know if that's like a common thread or common story that's going around in the industry, because I've had people send me emails and ask me to be the midwife to their books. So I think generally it's like the 9-month rule. But as soon as the manuscript is ready to go and to be put into production, the kind of production schedule that I work with is usually about 4 months, meaning after those 4 months, we've got PDFs that are ready to go to print. And, in terms of we've got a publication date, but the proofs usually go to print, say 6 weeks before publication date. So that's also something you have to factor into the schedule. So yeah, it's a lot of one-on-one work, and I usually tell writers they're going to be annoyed with seeing my name in the inbox all the time, because sometimes the schedule is just a guideline. A guideline, Zuki would know. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of work that goes into it. So you are working on one project for a few months.
9 months sounds like pregnancy. Zuki, what's your lead time?
And Stevlin said I would know because I'm generally on time with my deadlines. And she isn't. But with me, I generally, I don't have the 25 books of Andrea's, for instance. But what I do is I have often realized, as a publisher, I publish because I love something. So if a story comes into my inbox, even if I don't, I feel that it's not yet developed enough, I will send back to the editor, to the writer, and I will say, can you do more work? I'll give them editorial feedback, and I say, can you do more work on this? I don't have a 9 month. I have a five drafts rule. Usually, if it's a certain type of writer, so there's usually I get the manuscript. I'm like, nah. Expand, do this, add this, subtract this, and then I take it back to them, and then they do the second draft, and then I look at it, and then I'm like, okay, now we're doing an edit, not a content edit, So we have the third draft, and then we have clean up, then fourth, and then fifth. It's fourth, then it goes to proofreading, and then the fifth draft is what you usually end up reading. And so depending on the writer, it depends. I think I have done maybe like, I've had an instance where one of the books that I did was a translation. So the writer spoke and could read English. So what I did is, the translator and I and the writer got into it, because I also want us to be, I realize that a translator is an artist in their own right, but I also want to ensure that we keep true to what the writer was saying with that particular thing. So I generally have them together, and we do these calls, and we say, okay, what are we going to do? These are the notes that I have. And the writer will be like, no, I don't want that. And I'll say to the writer, well, no, actually, this translation is no longer your baby. Largely, it's now the baby of the translators. So there is that I like playing with and working with. So yeah, it just really just depends on the author. But the general rule, if it's not a reissue of somebody else's book, is usually 5 drafts.
Okay, so we've got 5 drafts, 9 months, 6 months. Yeah, it's quite, it varies. I get from industry, from company to company as well. I mean, I think one last question in terms of process. I mean, are there any genres that you are particularly interested in publishing, or has that also evolved over the years?
I mean, for me, it evolves all the time. Part of what you're doing is keeping your ear to the ground. You're looking at international trends as well. You're seeing, okay, which of these might be applicable to our local markets, which not. When I first started at PAN, it was very much politics, current affairs driven, and that has evolved quite considerably, and also for me, commercial fiction is something which has grown increasingly important in recent years, because we've got the most amazing storytellers and we need to get their stories out there. And then, you also just keep your eye on trends that are outside of publishing as well. And some of the time you're trying to pitch yourself 18 months down the line. So sometimes you miss, but sometimes you make it in terms of books, particularly in that nonfiction space. And then you've also got to look at your audiences locally, because while you might see something like romantasy being large in the charts, particularly internationally, or audiobooks being the biggest growth area internationally, you've got to look at what's working locally, with an eye on the future. So South Africa is often a bit slow on the uptake on some things. So are we going to catch up? Should we be gearing? Should we be advanced? So it really is a juggle, and really there, my kind of colleagues and people where we have the kind of meetings, brainstorming, strategy meetings, and so on. We're looking all the time and we're thinking about where we should be publishing.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have those strategy sessions, close to the end of the year, because we do work quite far in advance in terms of our publication lists for the following year. So it is very important to know what the trends are internationally and also what we see happening locally. I think those are good indicators of what people are interested in and what they want to keep reading. And I think right now, the biggest trend that we see right now is crime fiction. It's quite big. It's a genre that's quite big. I think when I'm thinking about my publication list and when you're kind of shaping what you're going to be putting out the next year, I don't think that I'm too focused on genre. It really is about the stories that you read that you feel are important and that should be told. Diversity is a very big thing. So I'm more kind of guided by the manuscripts that I receive than really genre. I mean, it's great to obviously have that knowledge, and that does impact when you make a choice. But I think there are the various things that you keep in mind when you're establishing your publication list.
Being the bit of the maverick in the house, I tend to. The one thing that I'll tell you that I don't publish is nonfiction. And the reason I don't publish nonfiction is because I tend to look at the audience from the rest of the continent. If somebody gives me a manuscript that's set in Zimbabwe about them growing up in Zimbabwe, or in South Africa about, some crime, whatever, will it be able to be relatable to everybody else on the continent, whereas fiction is able to travel much better. I did say when I started at the beginning, I said I wanted to just do adult fiction because I enjoy it. And what ended up happening is the first book that I actually published was a children's book, because this one of my friends came to me and they said, "Oh, why don't you, since you started a publishing company, why don't you publish this?" And I thought to myself, well, I said I wasn't going to do it. I said to her, "Send me the manuscript. Let me see whether it's something that I can relate to." And so she sent me a manuscript, and it was an anthology of 11 stories at that time. It ended up being 12 children's stories from about 8 African countries. And when I read it and I was reading all these different stories, I was thinking to myself, these are the stories that I wish I had read, I had access to when I was growing up. So of course, I very easily at that point in time say, yes, I'm going to do it. And I was lucky then to also have people coming in and saying, "Oh, we really love this. Can we get it? I'd love to have this in my language and in my language." And I said, "Well, if you'd love to have it in your language, can you please fund it? And so from there, I at least got a Xhosa translation, a Kiswahili translation, a Shona translation, and a Tshivenda translation. So yeah, I just publish what I enjoy, and and I hope that it works out when it comes out. And part of that is because I don't really follow trends, because I'm a writer and I'm not a person who is any particular trend. I like playing with myself as a publisher. As a writer, I like the idea of saying, okay, I'm going to write a crime fiction story, or I'm going to write historical fiction, and I'm going to write so-called chick lit, etc. So I don't want, in the same way, I don't want to be boxed. I try to just make sure that I have a good story as a publisher that I can, distribute to whoever is in the world.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think also the importance of asking this question is for people in the audience, who want to be published, in terms of where to take their manuscripts. Some publishers are very genre specific, and they'll probably only publish fantasy. So you also have to look, or romance. So you have to look at the publisher and see if your work aligns to what they're looking for as well. So it's also very important when you're looking for a publisher. And then my last question in terms of the publishing process. I mean, it's been said that the biggest evolution that has taken place in publishing has been in the growth of the self-publishing industry versus traditional publishing. Would you agree?
I think so, yes. For me, the publishing ecosystem needs people who are self-published, and it needs people who are published through traditional publishers. And then there are also some companies that do a little bit of a hybrid system. So, they will look for some funding from an author, but they will help with various aspects of the book publishing process. Self-publishing for me, and the rise of self-publishing, is absolutely awesome, because we cannot, when I say we, I'm not just meaning Pan Macmillan, I'm sure I speak for all the traditional publishers. You can't publish every book that comes your way, even if it is publishable. You have to make choices. You've got limited resources. And so, we are regularly turning down manuscripts that are sent in that I've got no doubt they are publishable. They just don't necessarily fit with what Pan Macmillan wants to do. Also, because we're a small team, we have to be passionate about what we're doing. That's how you bring the energy and how you actually do the best for an author. If you love their book and you're able to champion it within your company. So I think the rise of self-publishing is great. I do think that it doesn't always lead to the best quality, and that for me is where occasionally self-publishing gets a bad name, or has a bad name, where people think that the quality isn't necessarily all that good. But these days you absolutely can produce a book that looks and reads as though it were professionally published. And I think with the advent of platforms like an Amazon, that provides various outlets, the digital kind of innovations, whether it's an ebook or whether it's a print book, and even with a print book, something like Lightning Source, the print-on-demand platform. It's a global platform. You can get your book published, and you can put it on that Lightning Source platform, and it can be ordered in most places in the world, which I think is just absolutely wonderful for the ecosystem and for the readers, because people are also really keen and eager and looking for particular kinds of content, and they're able to find it, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the growth in the self-publishing, part of this industry is exciting. Look, in terms of the hundreds of manuscripts that I receive in a year, I mean, I can only publish 10, maybe 12 if I push myself. And so it is very sad because there are instances where you have to make a very tough call and you're not able to publish a certain book. So to know that that option is available, and that publishing is more accessible to many writers, whereas previously it wasn't, I think that's a great thing. I mean, look, Kwela's mandate is to broaden the literary landscape with the kind of stories that, you know, we publish. And so I think that self-publishing is a way that that happens, that we change the landscape, that more people have a voice and they're able to tell their stories. So I think that's very important. And I think that with the rise of self-publishing, there are also other innovative kind of things that happen, especially if you think of consumer behavior that's changing, right? Whereas it's not always brick and mortar kind of stores. We now have e-commerce, we have other channels in which the self-published authors are marketing their books and selling their books, which creates a lot of opportunity and I think a lot of scope for where, you know, this landscape or where this industry is going in the future.
Yeah, there's certainly growth in self-publishing. You yourself, Sue, I first read you when you had, from the work that you had self-published. Dudubusani Dube, Busekile Kumalo are some of the authors that we have seen. I generally consider myself in that particular field a bit of a hybrid because I go with a particular publisher for all my books, and then I take my rights back at some point in time, and then I reissue it via my own imprint. But one of the things that I often caution people about, which is something that Andrea mentioned, is quality. You know, if it's possible, please, and this is very, very important to every person thinking about self-publishing, because so often I notice that people will invest maybe like in the cover design. They won't invest as much in an editor. It's so important to invest in editing, you know, and I don't say that sometimes the editing will be that great, and the reason it might not be that great is if you're paying somebody to do the work, and you know, they might be kind of like tread softly, but generally it's important to get a good editor, have a budget for it, have an editor, have a proofreader as well, have a budget for it, and have a cover designer. You also need to be aware that when the book is now out, you are the one who's going to have to find a distributor for it. So it is quite a lot of work. But if you're willing to put in the work, then that's absolutely fine. Some of the people I know who have self-published have said that they've done it because they sent to 5 publishers or 10 publishers and they were rejected. And I say, well, you know, maybe if 10 publishers rejected you, maybe your book is not ready. But maybe there were 10 publishers who didn't also have like vision of what you were doing. So it's quite, you know, touch and go. But I generally say if it's your first work, if possible, try and go with a traditional publisher, if possible at all. And there have been people who have sent me their manuscripts, and that's because I know I don't have the capacity. If I feel there's something that's actually really, really great about it, I will tell you the different types of publishers to go to. And I realize that we're talking about publishing in South Africa, but it's also very important to note that we've got a whole continent. So don't limit yourself to South Africa. Don't limit yourself even to this continent. You can go beyond, you know, to the rest of the world. As far as this continent is concerned, you've got Narrative Landscape in Nigeria. We've got Jahazi Press in Kenya. There are just a whole lot of publishers that have sprouted up on the continent. And unlike obviously the publishers in the West, they are quite easy. You don't need to go to them through an agent. You can go directly and do the 3 chapters and write whatever else you're going to give. Masobe generally does call outs in the same way that I know Pan Macmillan does. At least once a year, where they have a month where they say, okay, send us your manuscript, let's see what you got. So it's worthwhile looking at literary blogs like Writing Africa and other literary blogs, just see what is available, what is being called out, and where can you submit your work.
Thank you, Zuki, for making that segue into the authors and the rights, because it raises an interesting question, because publishers generally represent authors, and I just wanted to find out, like, from the different publishers, like, let's talk about rights to the work and royalties, because people are interested in and what is in it for me as the writer. Karina from Caravan Press was saying she pays the highest royalty in the industry of 18% currently. How do you come up with royalty rates? Let's just, delve into that for a little bit.
I can't, unfortunately, talk specifics around royalties and royalty rates, because one, that was flagged by the Competition Commission with the South African publishing industry as something that is not meant to be discussed. It is specific to a particular contract, and it's specific to a particular author and project and so on. For me, I would always say that if you're going to publish your work through a traditional publisher, you do need to understand that they are taking on all of the pre-production costs, they're taking on the printing costs, they're taking on the warehousing, the distribution, and then they're taking on the stock risk. So it's really important to kind of have that perspective. But at the same time, I think that authors are always in their right to question, how does this work? How do the royalty rates work? Is there any room for escalation? What is possible? And it really does depend. Is it a debut? Is it an experienced author? Are they global? Are they local? And so on. One of the things which Pan Macmillan has done is, with some of our authors who have managed to get international deals, let's use a Shubnam Khan as an example. Shubnam published Onion Tears locally, and then she published How I Accidentally Became a Global Stock Photo. And she then acquired a literary agent, an international literary agent, and she got a great deal on her next novel, which is The Jinn Waits 100 Years Overseas, but locally it is The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil. And there we were able to negotiate carving out the Southern Africa rights. Because we'd worked with Shubnam before, because we got such a great relationship. And so there, while generally I like to acquire, or Pan likes to acquire, world rights for an author, because it does give you more opportunity, there we were able to acquire Southern African rights. Or on the Damalere Cuckoo, Only Big Bam Bam Matters Tomorrow. These are just 2 titles from last year. We also had just Southern Africa rights. So you look at what the opportunities are, and you make a decision from there. If you've got world rights, some books will travel. As Zuki said, often fiction is what travels, although even there I've had feedback that says either this is not South African enough, or same manuscript, different person, this is too South African. So, where do you find yourself? I think we're often in a bit of a colonial relationship, sadly, here on the southern tip of Africa. So if you've got world rights, it does also allow you as a publisher to make the author's work available internationally as an ebook via Lightning Source and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to go with a very corporate answer that Andrea gave as well. But that is also because it does vary. And I mean, that's obviously dependent on the negotiations between publisher and author. I don't think it's possible to have a kind of standard across the board answer when it comes to royalties. But I do like that Andrea kind of highlighted the fact that you should ask questions and you should be willing to negotiate and have that, be brave enough to kind of have that conversation with the publisher. And I mean, I am a takeoff chance. So I encourage other people to always ask questions and take a chance and see how that works out for you. Yeah, but it's not possible to have a standard answer to that.
I tend to have, unlike these other two, actually have a standard answer. And my standard answer is, as a publisher, I don't ask from my authors what I don't ask from my publishers. So I know for a fact that I am able to get the book on the continent, but I will very highly unlikely get it off the continent. So I'm not going to ask you for world rights because I wouldn't know how to, get it outside. And one of my biggest issues as an author when I first started is that I didn't ask about that. And so when my first book came out 19 years ago, I then had this book that was just like in Joburg and Cape Town bookstores, but I'd given away world rights and it wasn't even available as close as Botswana or Zimbabwe or Namibia. So I'm always, and it was one of those things that thereafter I was like, I won't give world rights unless I'm absolutely certain that a publisher can get it. And thus far, I haven't seen it, whether it's a publisher from the West or, from the global North or the global South. So I don't give that. And as a publisher, I don't ask for it. I will say, okay, I'm going to give the rights. I can do that. Sometimes I even go further and say, well, you know what? I am particularly good in East and Southern Africa, so I can do that. I will be able to get it to West Africa without a problem, but it's easier for me to be able to travel between East and Southern Africa. Somebody had asked, and this is probably a great way to segue into answering a question that I saw in the comments regarding the book. The children's book is called Story, Story, Story Come. And I published for East and West Africa, East and Southern Africa. And it was edited by Maimuna Jallo, and Lolasho Neyin's Wida Books published it for West Africa because we knew what our strengths were as publishers, and the editor just happened to be a friend of ours, a mutual friend.
Okay, thank you for that, Suki. And I think if there are upcoming writers who are looking to be published, it's important to ask those questions. I know in the excitement of receiving that contract, a lot of these things are forgotten, the fine line, and these are the things that come back to bite you. Just get advice as well, in terms of the rights. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to unpack other rights that I wanted to speak about, like subsidiary rights. But maybe we'll have a follow-up conversation. I just want to now piggyback on Marina's question as well about the positioning of authors. I mean, the biggest complaint has been that if you walk into a bookshop now, you always find international authors, in the front window, hogging the limelight, and local authors at the back. And there's this thing of how do we then promote local authors when they're being sacrificed at the altar of international authors and international books? So how do we navigate that question?
That for me is something where you need to bring in the kind of sales and marketing and publicity side of things as well. I mean, having been around this industry for 30 years, we've definitely seen local chains and bookstores place more emphasis on local authors. It is just a fact as we unpack, how many books is a bestseller in our local environment. If you think about that, and you think about the numbers that international publishers are dealing with, my kind of best-selling book barely registers on the scale of a PanMac UK, publisher, commissioning editor. So the kind of intricacies of scale are really quite tricky. And they also speak to another issue that I know and think we should also discuss, just around the cost of books, particularly in the South African, community, where the fact of the matter is that scale matters so much when it comes to the printing of a book. And if I'm printing a book and I'm only able to print 1,000 copies of it, my unit cost for that print run is so much higher than if I were printing 3,000 even, or 30,000 or 300,000. The kinds of print runs, initial print runs that internet, I can only dream of. I also think these days there's a lot that you can do via social media, via an author's own presence, via the book clubs that we've got that are quite amazing in terms of the network that they then provide for promoting and reading local authors and for encouraging people. In my personal capacity, my book club, it's a good 60% local and 40% international. And that's not only through me, that's also through me saying to people, hey, what about there's a new Sunyati, there's a new Zuki, and actually then encouraging it. But it is a process. It's a process that takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort, and you have to do it because otherwise those authors do get swallowed.
Yeah, I think that's, most of the books that I publish currently are in English. And I usually tell authors that the issue with publishing local English titles is that we have to compete with the influx of international English titles. And I think this question about, bookstores and who gets kind of the limelight or the front of the store, that's been going on since I've started in this industry. But I can also say that I have seen a change. I think it's not kind of just, it was hiding kind of in the back of the bookstore. Those shelves have increased a little. We also see that bookstores have become a bit of a creative space, kind of, beyond selling the books in terms of launches, book signings, that sort of thing. We have initiatives like Homebrew, where it really is to shed a light and highlight our local authors. But I think that what Andrea was saying is important. If you think of a bookstore much like the publishing industry, we're a business, and a bookstore is a business. So it's a supply, it's demand and supply and demand. And so if we have more people going into the bookstore and asking for local authors, buying more local books, I think that is also one way of doing it, or kind of changing the narrative. We think about, most publishers are publishing in English and not in indigenous languages. But think of the influx of those, in terms of the market, those English books, it's mostly probably more than half it's international titles and not really local books. The local market for English titles, or just, the local market in general, is very small. And what we need to do is highlight our local authors and our local books more. And that is with things like marketing initiatives and visibility. And I think that we are sorely underestimating the use of social media and the internet. We see that in the international industry with something like BookTok. I think it really is a visibility thing, and making people aware of these amazing local writers that we have and these amazing books that are currently out there. So, I mean, I think it's a long way off, but I think that we have made strides. I think things are changing. It is very slow change, but it is changing.
I think the change that has existed has been cosmetic, and maybe I'm a little impatient because I come from both sides of the thing, So and the reason I say that, so there is it's a lot like the way international publishing says a book is not, say, an international by international book, where they say a book is not maybe African enough because they've decided this is the African narrative they want. I also think that bookstores locally, and I'm talking about bookstore chains here, get into a space where they say, well, we're selling so many Colin Hoovers, so therefore we're going to have a lot of Colin Hoovers. But we have to think differently. And it's something that I've been advocating for 20 years, since I was still editing my first novel. And I've been advocating for this because I'm saying, I've never gone into a bookstore in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in wherever. I've never gone into a bookstore in the Western world and I'll see a majority of books are from Africa. And then there's a shelf called Americana or Europeana or whatever. So it boggles my mind that I would come into a bookstore in an African country and then I have one shelf. I don't care how large you've made it. It's definitely more shelf space now, but one shelf that decides we're going to have from Cape to Cairo, we're going to have, Hamza Kudri, who's from Algerian, and, Chimamanda Ngozi, who's Nigerian, and they're all in this one shelf. To me, it's absolutely, utterly absurd. And why I even think it's even more absurd is if books, local books, did not sell, if books by writers from Africa did not sell, I'm telling you now, one of the most indie bookstores in this city, in Joburg, Book Circle Capital, would not be functioning. It would have closed after 1 year. It hasn't. It has existed. It continues to exist. And I can tell you right now, amongst all the bookstores that I do work with, Book Circle Capital is the one that consistently sends me a payment every month and saying, okay, we've sold X amount of the titles that you're publishing. So what is Sewela doing that the rest of the industry doesn't seem to understand? The book selling industry. So I think there needs to be a different mindset. I think we need to stop thinking that everything West is best and therefore this and that. Ever since I came into the industry, homebrew has existed. But when you think about it, we have a month for everything. You could have this month, you could have in March, you could have Human Rights Month, and you'd have books on human rights from South Africa and across the continent right in front. You could have in August Women's Month, and you'd have titles right across. So why isn't every month homebrew? That's what I want to see.
Thank you, Zuki. It's a question for all to ponder on as we come to the end of the session. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I had one last question that I wanted to pose before we open up for questions. I don't see any new questions on the group. So if you've got a question to ask, please throw it in so that we can open up. So one last question to the publishers on closing is, what do you feel will be the impact on AI? Do you think it will minimize the need or replace writers, as they often say, or even replace some of the tasks in the whole publishing process? 1 minute each. And your thoughts on AI and the future of publishing.
I do think that AI will have an impact in the kind of Pan Macmillan space. AI is something to perhaps help with very routine tasks associated with somebody's role, but it's never something that is meant to replace a person's input. You can't replace a person's input. I think there's some really interesting developments happening in the AI space around audiobooks and the possibility of creating deep backlist with audio. And I used to be very like, oh, audio, AI, audio, narrated kind of books, but there's some really interesting developments with a narrator being used to train AI to read a book, and then that person's voice, if they're then used to narrate a particular audiobook, they do then receive a fee for that, because I would never want an AI to read a book and no human to, no voice actor to get any kind of acknowledgement of the work, because at the moment in that AI space, or in that audio space, sorry, we work with narrators and they get paid a fee, obviously. So I think for me, it has got some quite exciting stuff there. I think it's evolving all the time. At the moment, you can very definitely see when something is generated by AI, it is wooden, it is often super grammatically correct. And in the kind of books that I publish, an author's voice is everything. And an AI can't replicate unless you were to kind of feed it in. But even then, you can see, if you play around, you can absolutely see. And then just lastly, kind of on a more kind of humorous note, I guess, so much of what I do is deal with authors as individuals. And everyone here will also know that, and you're a published author, you go through various stages and phases. Your publisher needs to talk you off a ledge at certain points. They need to be your biggest champion at others. They need to keep your expectations in check. And I don't think there's any AI that's going to be able to do that job. So from that point of view, I do think, I think there's a real interest in stories that are incredibly well curated, that are mirrors or windows. They're either a mirror for someone to see some aspect of their life reflected back at them, or they are a window to peek into somebody else's kind of life. And I think that real life human publishers and authors and the people that go with it do that better than any AI currently can.
I mean, I definitely have to agree with Andrea there. I mean, if you think about AI writing a novel, it definitely, I don't think it would work at all. The parts that make a book so special is that human aspect. And if you think about, each writer has this very kind of distinctive and unique voice. And that's also what makes you buy the book, what makes you want to read the book. I mean, you have currently, say we have 20 crime writers, but each book is still very unique, very different. They could be writing about the same themes and subject matter, but the human being's perspective and way of telling the story or thinking about certain things is what makes that book so unique. So, I mean, I don't think AI is going to be writing books anytime soon, and we won't have a use for writers anymore. But I do think that there's definitely a way for us to use AI as almost an intelligent assistant, I guess, ways to make our jobs a little easier or give us enough time to be more efficient in other tasks. I know that people are playing around with how they can use AI. So if you think about kind of editing or proofreading, I mean, I think that there are chat boxes that are available now where you can, add a style guide, a very specific style guide, and they could edit, a manuscript accordingly. But that would be like kind of very first draft kind of thing. It doesn't replace an editor. I mean, I don't think AI can become a manuscript developer. I mean, the characters, the plot, all of those things. I don't think that AI necessarily, or at least not now, and hopefully not in my lifetime, will will be able to replace us. Although I do think that there are positives and there are, that we look at AI in that way, even if it is a writer researching a specific topic and using AI to help refine the search, or using it as a sounding board, I guess, to see what books are currently out there if they're thinking about a specific theme or topic. So I think there are ways that we can use AI, but I don't think that it's here to replace us.
Good news, Zuki. Over to you.
I think, the only time that AI would replace humans if they're doing a biography or a memoir of somebody as bland as Elon Musk, because there is, if we understand that art is emotion, it's feeling, this is not yet something that I've seen and AI be able to perform. And, it's useful, obviously, I think, as far as maybe spelling mistakes and stuff like that are concerned, like a little grammatical errors. But ultimately, as an artist, as a reader, I'm personally not worried. I'm not worried, and I don't think, even I saw a comment talking about prolific writers being pressured. I think every writer, before they publish a book, they get it published because it's ready, not because they're in a rush to have something out for the audience. At least I hope so. Sue, I don't know whether that's the same for you, but it certainly is the same for me. So my last novel was, before this one, was 10 years ago or so.
Yes, and Chimamanda's just dropped hers, after 10 years. So I think actually time actually makes the manuscript better. I think so. I trust in that as well. So yeah, we are finally at the end of our discussion. There are no questions. I don't know, am I right in saying there are no questions from the audience? I don't see any new ones. Going once, twice. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. No, thank you. This was such a engaging and, interesting and thought-provoking conversation. It's unfortunate we didn't have more time. I wanted to touch on copyright issues, but, this is not the end. I think we should have more ongoing conversation around, these issues, and just keep, our toes, keep ourselves on our toes and on what's happening in the industry and where we can evolve as well. And and talk more so that people also understand, what is involved in publishing, beyond what you see, the cover. You just see the book on the shelf, but so much goes into it. And there's so many people behind the scene that make that book a reality. And, publishing contributes so much to the creative economy. But it's largely undermined. Its role is undermined, and but we need to support this industry, and hopefully we'll be here 10 years from now to have this conversation, and we can report of changes and more evolution in the industry. So on that note, I just want to thank you all for taking time to chat with us, and I hope the audience enjoyed the conversation, and you gleaned a lot from this interaction. Thank you.